Hello, welcome to week 5, Sociology 1, and we're going to look at socialization. Now in this week we're going to do socialization as a complete unit, and then I'll start off with the next section on social structure, collective behavior, and the rest of that chapter. So socialization, it's an important element of all cultures. All cultures have socialization as a part of the society's growth and the cultural growth. And so sociology, in terms of how it looks at socialization, is how does a society or a culture bring up young ones and help the entire society become part of this society and part of this culture. And that's all part of how we grow up and how are we influenced to learn the things we learn to be successful and to survive in our own cultures and societies. So that's what sociology essentially is. It's this sort of lifelong becoming strong participants in our own culture and in our own society. And how do we go about doing this? We're going to look at agents of socialization. So what are the influences in our socialization? We're going to look at re-socialization. We'll look at gender socialization in this area of socialization. It's a very important topic because all of us have been socialized. We are continuing to be socialized while we're at school. And all of our socialization, albeit done in a very similar process, we've each been socialized by different influences and what those influences have shared with us and taught us about what it is to be a good Canadian or a good husband or a good wife or a good boyfriend or a good student. We've all learned that as a part of our growing up, which is our socialization. So good luck with this topic, and I hope you enjoy it. Bye now.
Okay, so when we think about why is socialization important, let's first define what it is. When we look at the definition, a lifelong process of social interaction through which individuals acquire a self-identity, so knowing who you are, and the physical, mental, and social skills needed for survival in society. So think about that. It's a lifelong process. And so just because you're a teenager or a young adult doesn't mean you're done. If you're in school, you're being socialized to be into the program and into the career choice you want to be. But then as you get older, you continue to get into other things that you're learning and you continue to be socialized. Now, it's about acquiring a self-identity. So who am I? Well, part of that is through my socialization and who I've been associated with and who's been my mentors, my family, the coaches and teachers in my life have all helped me understand who I am and where I fit. And then the physical skill sets required, how to navigate the world around me, how to drive a car, how to do the things physically that are required to be a solid citizen and a Canadian citizen and a member of Owen Sound, for example. The mental skills, well, this would include the things that you need to be able to think about and how you think about being that citizen, how you navigate and how you use your brain to interact with other people and how you do that socially appropriately. And then lastly, skills needed, the social skills, how you communicate with people you know well, how you communicate with family, how you communicate with strangers, all in which is aiming towards your own personal survival and successful navigation in society. Sociologists have emphasized that the social environment is crucial in terms of one's own individual socialization. It's essential for our survival and growth. It's essential for survival and stability of the society. And the content varies from culture to culture. What I'm socialized to be here in Canada, the process of socialization is same in some other country, but what they learn is appropriate for their culture and survival in their societies. So what we believe about ourselves, our society, and the world is largely a product of our interactions with other people. Now, when we think about socialization, there are different agents of socialization, or people or groups of people who influence who we become. These are all the persons, the groups, or institutions that teach us what we need to know to participate in society. And first and foremost, one of the primary agents of socialization is family. Now, family is variable. And that is to say that we may have a variety of different definitions. There is the legal definition, there's a personal definition, there's a social definition. And so family can also be variable in the fact that some people are born and raised by the same parents throughout their life, intact families. Some are single parented, some are in blended families, some are parented by same-sex couples. And so family is a very big part of who we become and how it shapes who we are. The initial concept of ourself is formed from our family. We learn about our social class from our family. We learn about our ethnic background and ancestry. We learn about, the significance of geography. If you were born in the city, you learn something about life in a city that's different than what people who are born rurally live and what they learn. The difference between the East Coast and the West Coast and where your families are from and where you live all can contribute to in a significant part on how you're socialized and how you learn about who you are. Now, family isn't the only agent. We may start to see the impact as our first major institution, or second major institution, is schools. When you first go to daycare, you start to learn that you're not the only person in the world, and that you learn to share, you learn to negotiate, you learn to cooperate. And school is essentially where needs of the whole, the needs of the group might override the needs of the individual. We learn a lot about meeting expectations. We learn a lot about achievement through school. And we continue through school, through public school, high school, and many times into post-secondary and beyond. All of which learning different things about how to survive in skills, physical skills, mental skills, and social skills. Now, in addition to school, we start to see the significance of peers. Peers can be a very significant socializing agent. In fact, it's probably the most important influence of adolescence. Even though the adolescent still lives very much in the family, it's the peers that have a strong influence on who a child sees themselves to be, an adolescent sees themselves to be, and what gets rewarded, and what is seen as unacceptable. So the peer becomes a very important socialization agent. Then we can start getting into other elements of the greater society, mass media. This reflects every aspect of society, but not necessarily accurately. And so now we have a variety of propaganda and message being funneled to us in a variety of different media, whether it's print media, television, internet, social media, radio, all sorts of messages that we have to filter through, and based on who we see ourselves becoming, we pay attention to some media maybe more than others. It informs us about events, although we tend to know more about media figures than we know about current events. We might be more aware of a wide variety of people through mass media. It provides us with a wide array of viewpoints of current events and different positions on those current events. They make us aware of products and services that if we purchase them, we supposedly help us be accepted by others. Now these are probably the main ones that come to mind, but there are certainly other ones. We could look in many families the role of religion plays. It has an influence on morality. It has an influence on ethics. It may be a belief system that is important to a family and therefore become important to us in sustaining our lives throughout our lives. One of the more up and coming, if you will, is also sports. Now, not in the way you might think, certainly in terms of the concept of team, but also in terms of, almost the value system of a team gets expressed in such a manner that is attractive to individuals, and we sort of pull ourselves or are drawn to sports teams and their memorabilia and their symbols, and those things become meaningful to us. And lastly, the one I'll touch base on is the workplace. In the workplace, again, it's a reinforcement of team, working on cooperative goals, establishing adult relationships, And in some cases, because of shared interest in work and career, we also meet partners who become future family members through our workplace. Now, what I want to go through a bit is look at some of the sociological theories around human development in regards to socialization. And the first I'm going to touch on is Cooley, George Cooley, and then I'm also going to look at, Charles Cooley, and then I'm also going to look at Mead as well. So let's first look at, here we go, Cooley. Charles Cooley, he came up with what we would call the looking glass self. And in the looking glass self, we imagine how our personality and our appearance look to others. We look to see others in their view of us. We imagine how others judge our appearance and how they judge our personality. We think if we think others' view of us is positive or negative, our self is either enhanced or diminished. And so this is the looking glass self. And it's an important feature. Now, if the feedback I get from others tells me that I'm good, or my personality or my appearance is desirable, then I start to get a better appreciation for myself in a more positive way. Whereas if I get negative feedback, then this starts to shape some of my perspective of myself in a more of a negative way. It's important to note that our sense of self isn't something we're born with. There's no genetic, code for yourself. A baby that's born has no sense of who they are. And so we get a sense of who we are through the experience of the outside world. Now, George Mead, on the other hand, he worked with Cooley in the same sort of time frame, and his interests here had more to do with role taking. That role taking is a process by which a person mentally assumes the role of another person in order to understand the world from that person's point of view. Now, role taking happens at an early age. If you go to a daycare and watch children play, frequently children will play house. Boys will play husbands and fathers, and women and girls will play wives, and you will see how they seem to role play those situations, oftentimes depicting what home is like for them. But that's role taking. They're trying to put themselves in the shoe of somebody else. And from Mead's perspective, this was an important piece. And one of the examples I can remember when my daughter was in daycare and I was a behavior consultant, I would go and observe children at daycare. And I was at the daycare that my daughter was at, and I had been a strong advocate of allowing my daughter to have choice, but I would frame the choice. It's time for bed, not are you ready for bed? And so I would say it's time for bed. Do you want to get started on your own, or would you like me to help you? And so a lot of my choices with her were created that way. And so when it came to being at daycare, she was playing house with this young lad, and she said, let's go shopping. And he said, no, I don't think so. Then she said, would you like to drive to the shopping center, or would you like to walk to the shopping center? And he said he'd like to drive. So the idea of role taking enabled her to learn some things about how to frame. Now, an important part of Mead's work was what he called significant others. Now, these are persons who care, provide care to children, are affectionate and approval, and especially desired, who are most important in the development of self. Now, what we don't know is in every child, you don't know who is going to be a significant other. We assume a parent, a coach, a teacher, but a child will be drawn to someone who is giving them care, affection, and approval. So any person can potentially be a significant other. And that's an important feature to Mead's work. So that significant other plays an important role in developing a child or a person's sense of who they are based on the feedback they provide. Now, to continue on with Mead, he also had a central concept of the self having an I and having a me. The I represents the spontaneous individual aspect of oneself, and the me is the socially aware part of yourself. That is the aware of the societal attitudes and the expectations then when these things are brought together, when they're combined, it creates the social self. Now, he argued that there was stages of development of this social self. And the first stage was what was called the preparatory stage, or there was no role taking, it was an imitation. 0 to 3-year-olds or 3-year-olds and under were mimicking and preparing and taking roles. And so the first stage, being preparatory, was just what was also known as parallel play. Kids playing in the presence of one another, but not with one another. The second stage was that of play. And taking the role of another person began. And this was happening between ages of 3 and 5, and it's also what we would describe as pretending. And then stage 3 is taking the role of another in many situations. And here, we're not just taking the role, we are aware of the other's role and are manipulating that in a playful sort of game sort of strategy. Now, when we look at the development of self as a human being, that's one thing. We also start to look at gender socialization. And if we go by definition, gender socialization are the aspects of socialization that contain specific messages and practices concerning the nature of being female or male to a specific group or society. Now, it's an important thing to note here, gender is not biology. Gender is socially constructed. And what I mean by socially constructed is gender is different from society to society, from culture to culture. In our culture, we generally see 2 genders, male and female. In other cultures, you may find 3 or even 5 genders. It doesn't mean there's more biology, it's how does the society view people and how do they categorize, if you will, people into gender. So what is it to be male and what is it to be female will even vary from culture to culture. So the source of our gender socialization is usually family. It can be our social class, it can be our schools, peers, media, whatever we find in our computer. And the effects is basically to tell us what does it mean to be masculine and what does it mean to be feminine. Now, gender socialization varies among diverse ethnic and social class groupings. Gender socialization is important in determining what we think the preferred sex of a child should be and in influencing our beliefs about acceptable behavior for males and females. So from kindergarten right through to college, teachers and peers reward gender-appropriate attitudes and behavior. So part of how we see ourselves based on what it is to be male and female is how we've been taught and what we've been exposed to in terms of seeing that this is acceptable and this is unacceptable. Now, not everyone adheres to that, and we find that for the most part, most people accept a generalized view of what it is to be masculine and what it is to be feminine. Now, in a society, these can change over some time, and we see some of those shifts occurring over the last 20 years. Sports reinforces traditional gender roles through the rigid division of events into male and female categories. The media are also very powerful sources of gender socialization from an early age. Children's books, television programs, movies, music provides subtle and sometimes not so subtle messages about what it is to be masculine and what it is to be feminine. Now, when we think about socialization, it's not something that only happens in our childhood. Socialization occurs throughout the entire life of a human being. And so why is socialization a lifelong process? Well, we continue to learn throughout our whole life. When we experience a change in status, going to university, we're learning more. When we get our first job, we learn other things that are appropriate for that environment. When we get married, we start to learn more about what it is to be married and socialize to what would be that step in that sort of part of our life. We learn a whole new set of rules, roles, and relationships throughout different stages of our life. And it's just a part of what we experience. Now, as an adult, we often choose. And so it's what's often known as anticipatory socialization, the process by which knowledge and skills are learned for future roles. And because some of these future roles, like a new job or a career choice and going to college, These are things that we choose to do. Classes can be viewed as pre-job socialization, learning how to do the job you plan on doing. Whoops, here we go. Okay, socialization throughout the life course, well, it happens in a variety of stages of life. In infancy and childhood, the central concern during infancy and childhood is the family support that you receive, the guidance that you get from family are crucial to a child's development and self-concept. So some of the basic things that occur during this time to aid and should have facilitate socialization is the play that children have, carefree play, that they're in a safe environment both emotionally and physically, and the freedom from economic and political and sexual responsibilities. These are not concerns of a child. Child is about play, and in fact that's a relatively new experience for children. Children at one point, not that long ago, less than 100 years ago, were employable, and it was important to the economics of a family. But family has evolved over time, and it was in about the 30s and the 40s that children were seen as economically worthless. Now that's not meant to be disparaging, it just meant that children weren't seen as desirable employees. They were starting to emerge as not like little adults, but were in fact children that deserved to have a childhood. Now now in terms of adolescence, the industrialized societies, this stage represents a buffer between childhood and adulthood. Now, it's common during this adolescence period to go through a much emotional and social unrest. There's a lot of struggle and conflict between parental wishes and peer pressures and trying to sort out who you are in all of that. Transition from upper to middle class families to higher education. All these different struggles make adolescence a very difficult period of time, and so the socialization that can occur here can be quite a struggle. In adulthood, there's three major focuses: work in the paid labor force, the development of intimate relationships that often results in marriage and having children, and then three, seeking personal fulfillment. And so in adulthood, one focus is getting a good career and a paid job, another is a family starting, and the third is seeking fulfillment. Now in late adulthood, one of the connectors and one of the elements that has been a part of more recent years has been what's called ageism. This is the prejudice or discrimination against people on the basis of their age, particularly against older persons. Now, if one is going to successfully age, many elderly experience financial security, and that's partly due to the work ethic that they were raised in. They seem to have more freedom, they are healthier than they've been, and happier than in previous generations. There's a new positive image of the elderly, and in fact in Canada now there are more people in Canada aged 65 and older than there are people in Canada 14 and younger. It's the first time that's ever happened. And lastly is another element of socialization called resocialization. Resocialization is the process of learning a new and different set of attitudes, values, and behaviors from those in one's previous background. Now, we can do this in two ways. We can do it voluntarily. This is where we receive new status of our own free will. This might be, as I've indicated here, a religious conversion that you make, or if you join the armed forces, you're re-socializing, you're giving up one set of values perhaps, and adopting a new set of values. Now, of course, there is involuntary, and this is where you don't choose it of your own free will. And this was back in the day when armed force conscription, or you were, brought into because of your age, you were made to do some time in the military, or if you've broken the law, you were in prison, and that will also be a resocialization opportunity. Okay, now I'm just going to show you a quick little video that sort of summarizes the significance of socialization of children. Now, I know there may be some spots in here you may find it a bit humorous, but I hope you take it more seriously and notice the significance of the message.
Looks like rain again today. Dark clouds gather and fill the sky. Don't know how to talk to you, just know how to say goodbye.
Have you actually got a driver's license? I don't think so. Did you see it's back there, George? Go back where you came from. Learn to speak. Go back where you came from. What's wrong with you, Harry?
Get over here! You don't want to sleep! I've had enough of you! I've had enough of you!
Okay, well, always when I watch that, it reminds me of the role that I play in children's lives, whether it be my own or, for that matter, any child who looks to me as a potential significant other. So take the role seriously. All right, now, enjoy your day, and I hope you have a good one.